Hi everyone, welcome to Codex Lee. My name's Lee and this is a channel all about books. So this is my October wrap-up. October was not a great reading month for me. I was in a bit of a slump. I feel like maybe I'm coming out of that slump now, but I only read 4 books in October. 2 physical books, 1 ebook and 1 audiobook. One of those books was a 2-star. One of them was a 3-star and 2 of them were 4 stars. Let's start with the worst, the 2-star. And this was Christine by Stephen King. The book is just way too long. The book is about 20 hours worth of audio, which I listened to at 1.75 times the speed, so I didn't have to endure it for the 20 hours. The only reason I didn't DNF it was because I was just determined to stay on track with the Stephen King project I have, reading all of his books in chronological order, so I stuck with it, but it was hard going. My response to the book is complicated by the fact that I'm not sure whether I respond worse to audiobooks as fiction audiobooks. So I've listened to a number of audiobooks now and they've been predominantly non-fiction, and I've enjoyed every non-fiction audiobook that I've listened to, whereas I've listened to 2 works of fiction as audiobooks, and I nearly DNF'd one, Christine, and I did DNF the other one, which was The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. And is that because they are genuinely really bad books, or is it because I don't enjoy listening to fiction in audio format, or is it because listening to these works in audio accentuates the flaws in the texts? So this is probably the 3rd Stephen King book that takes this idea of the evil place. We saw the prototype evil place in the Marston House in Salem's Lot. It was an idea that he perfected in the form of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining, and he returns to it in Christine with a slightly kind of a bit of a twist. This isn't a physical fixed abode. The evil place in this case is a moving object. It is a car that has, that is in possession of some sort of evil that inhabits it, and that evil is able to reach out and infect and influence people around it, and it kind of focuses itself, latches itself onto one individual, and in this case that individual is the protagonist, and I can't even remember his name. His name is Arnie. The main character's name is Arnie, and his best friend is Dennis, and in the early chapters we follow them. We learn a little bit about their friendship, how Arnie is kind of quite nerdy and has a lot of skin problems, and he's bullied, whereas Dennis is a bit more of a cool guy, but he likes Arnie and he gets along with Arnie. So I like the way that it was exploring this friendship, this kind of male bond. I thought that was quite interesting, and I like the way that the early chapters where there's no explicit suggestion that this car that Arnie sees is some kind of supernatural thing. It's just something that has some immediate influence upon him, and not an extremely negative one, but not an especially positive one. And I like the way that you see the early signs of obsession with this thing. So that was kind of interesting. But as soon as King introduces the female characters, it's offensive. It is offensive. So Arnie's girlfriend, who becomes, spoiler alert, becomes Dennis's girlfriend, or at least love interest for a while. She has no real kind of agency of her own. She's defined entirely through the perspective of these 2 boys, and she's defined by her sexuality, her sexual allure, from the perspective of these 2 teenage boys. And then Arnie's mother is once again an overbearing mother. The overbearing mother trope is something you see time and time again in Stephen King. And then Christine is personified as a woman, as a jealous, avenging girlfriend. It's very odd. It's very sexist. And I just got tired of it. The next book I want to talk about is the 3-star book, so I'm going to go from worst to best. And that was a memoir, Odd Girl Out, An Autistic Woman in a Neurotypical World by Laura James. I had seen a video on YouTube featuring Laura James being interviewed on a breakfast TV show in the UK, and I just thought that the story was interesting. This is a woman who, from a very early age, knew that she was different and struggled with certain things, with certain social situations, and didn't understand why. And she was later diagnosed with autism, but she wasn't diagnosed until she was 45 years old, at which point she was married. She was married and divorced and remarried, and had 4 children. So I'd already been through quite a lot in life before receiving this diagnosis. I read it fairly quickly. It was an enjoyable read. It wasn't quite what I expected. I expected to learn more about autism, and it doesn't give you a lot in that sense. It gives you little snippets of fact around what she discovers about this. But it's more, it is a memoir. It's more about this woman's life. And actually, some of the most engaging parts of this book were the sections that weren't really about her autism. Okay, so on to the 2 4-star books that I read in October. The first of those is Tough Voyage Ink by George R. R. Martin. This was one of the books that I wanted to read for the Monsterathon in September, but I got around to it in October. And yes, it's by that George R. R. Martin, he of A Song of Ice and Fire. This was published about a decade before the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire was published, Game of Thrones, of course. It's an odd book. It's about an odd man. He's called Haviland Tough. He's very large. He's sort of like 2 meters tall, obese, completely bald. He speaks with quite a strange diction. Quite sort of humorless, but also you don't know if he is trying to be witty and underneath the kind of seriousness. Everything is quite literal. He really, he doesn't lie, but he doesn't always necessarily tell the truth. So he's quite subtle in his methods. He comes into possession of a 30-kilometer long vessel called the Ark, and it has the ability to create life. It has a large bioengineering facility, and he uses that facility to help different planets who are facing various different ecological challenges, disasters in some cases. It's interesting. I was, just for fun, I was thinking, which Song of Ice and Fire character does Haviland Tough remind me of? And he doesn't really remind me of any characters from A Song of Ice and Fire. If he reminds me of anybody, he reminds me of the Doctor Who. Particularly, I was thinking sort of late era David Tennant, where he's has these godlike powers, and he's had them for quite a long time. And he's starting to bend the rules a bit to get his own way.
A Time Lord victorious.
Because he wants to help people, but perhaps there are instances where he shouldn't help them. So in Haviland Tough's case, he has godlike powers, and he's using them to help people on his terms. So regardless of how these people want to be helped, or whether they want him to help them, or whether they'd like to use the technology he has to help themselves, he still dictates the terms. And he's very effective at doing that. So there's something a little sinister about him, even though he is helping people. So that's interesting. He's an interesting character. At first I wasn't sure what to make of him, but as I read more of these, and the character develops, and he does develop, he becomes really quite an enigma, I think. So I really recommend this. It was a solid 4-star for me. It explores interesting ideas around overpopulation and kind of different ecological challenges, and the kind of lengths that we have to go to deal with some of these crises. And in that regard, it is perhaps even more pertinent now than it was when it was first published in 1986. So, really good book. I highly recommend Tough Voyaging. Whether you like his other works or not. So the fourth and final book that I want to talk about that I read in October, another 4-star book. This was a reread, and I read this one because the TV adaptation is coming out in a few days from now. That's Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which is of course the first book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. Now I had not read this in many years. Excuse me, by the way, I have a cold. I've had this cold for over a week now and it's sticking around. So I read this when I was at university, and I studied English literature, and I read a lot of John Milton. I actually studied John Milton. I wrote my undergrad thesis and my master's thesis on Milton. And of course, the phrase His Dark Materials comes from Milton's Paradise Lost, and there are many analogies between Paradise Lost and His Dark Materials. When I read this as a budding Miltonist, I was perhaps a little too fixated on the comparisons between Pullman's writing and Milton. And I think that took away the enjoyment of this somewhat from me, because I was constantly trying to figure out, is Lord Asriel the devil? How is he the devil? And, and I think it got a little silly. I was a very serious Miltonist. I think I'm a little less serious in that regard now. So rereading this was more for the enjoyment of reading the story. But it was tricky because I have seen the movie, which I thought was okay. I think most people concluded that it was okay. There were good things and bad things about it. I don't remember it that strongly, but the plot sticks in my mind. And because it's the first book in the series, it sets up a lot of the world building is going on here, and that sticks in your mind. So I felt like I was quite familiar with this. There weren't too many surprises. I kind of got some of the chronology of this a bit wrong in my head. So there were bits that I thought, like the incidents at the station, I thought happened in the conclusion of the book, but they happened a little bit earlier. So it was great. I mean, if you're not familiar with the plot, I don't know if I want to say much about it other than it is set in Oxford, in England, but it's not Oxford as we really know it. It's a little different. Everybody has a companion called the Demon, and when you're a child, your demon takes various different forms, animal forms, and then when you reach puberty, they stick to one form. And the main character, Lyra, she uncovers a mystery involving her uncle, Lord Asriel, and something happening in the North Pole. That's kind of what I want to say about it. If you've not read it before, then please do. It's really enjoyable. It just zips along. I read this in just a few days. It's a wonderful read. But like I say, I feel like first time around, I had too much Milton in my head to really appreciate this for what it was. Second time around, I felt like I was overly familiar with the plot to be entirely objective about it, but I still enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to reading the other two books in the trilogy, The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass. I plan to read those in November. I can't remember as much about those, so that might be a different experience reading them, but this is great. It's great. So that's it. 4 books, 2 paperbacks, well, 1 hardback, 1 paperback, 1 audiobook, 1 ebook. I'm hoping to read a lot more in November. I've already done my TBR video, so I'm going to read a minimum of 5, but I'm hoping to read maybe twice as much as that. So we'll see how things go. I'll see you guys soon.